You've landed on the Mortgage Life podcast, where we strive to bring you mortgage-related info that's easy to understand.
We have conversations with market experts to bring you timely updates, because there's one certainty in this industry: things change.
I'm Mindy Bodwin.
And I'm Pete Solomosi. Welcome to the Mortgage Life podcast. We are recording.
We're recording.
Welcome. Oh, no, we already did that part. Welcome to the Mortgage Life.
Welcome again.
So welcome to the Mortgage Life. This is a new background. So Mindy and I are recording this here in Vernon because she's here visiting from Victoria.
Yes.
So welcome.
Thank you.
And if you're watching this, so you might be listening to this on podcast, or if you're watching it, we're also on YouTube. So you could see this, and you'll see that I have ridiculously long hair because I'm just trying to grow it out. So don't mind that, please.
Are you going for the mullet or
I hope not.
just one big overall? Are you trying to get my hair, Pete? Is that what's happening?
I think so. So today we're talking about first-time home buyers. Now, we have mentioned first-time home buyers in a previous episode, which was
episode 17, re-recorded in 2 years ago, 2022. Yep. And at that time, we did an episode that was heavy on the programs, right? Yep. So it was pretty technical. And one thing we've learned about the programs, they change. So a couple of those things have changed, and we thought, well, we can re-record that. But why don't we just talk more in general about what it means to be a first-time home buyer and maybe things that a first-time home buyer should think about when they're thinking about buying a house.
Right. So if you are thinking of buying a home and this is potentially your first home, you probably have a lot of questions like, what are all the costs involved? Like, let's start with that. What are all the costs involved in owning a home?
I know it's a great question because no longer do you just, send your e-transfer for your rent payment on the first.
Right.
So one thing's a rent payment, then you think about the mortgage payment. So yes, of course, you have a mortgage, there is a payment. But one thing to remember with a mortgage payment is principal and interest, right? So interest is the cost, the expense. The principal portion is actually going back into your pocket. It's like you're putting a little bit of equity back into your house each month. So even though your rent payment and your mortgage payment may both be $2,200, it's actually more advantageous to have that mortgage payment because, again, a portion of that principal goes back into your pocket.
Some people like to call it a forced savings account.
There you go.
We could call it that. So that's an easy number to calculate. Your mortgage broker or Mindy and I can certainly help you with figuring out how much you can afford and what that mortgage payment would look like. Now, what else? Like we've obviously there's more to owning a home than just the mortgage payment.
Yeah. So other fixed costs, your property taxes.
Right.
So every year you get your house in BC. Let's just stick to BC for now to keep it simple. You get a BC assessment in the mail. It tells you what they say that your land and your home value is. And then each municipality has a different mill rate. So it's the number that they times the assessed value by to get your annual property tax amount.
Right. And so for most municipalities in BC, that is payable typically right around mid-year. So for most places, it's about July 2nd because the 1st is a holiday. So usually they'll say it's due on July 2nd. Some municipalities I have seen extend to the beginning of August. So it could be sometime in the middle of the year, but that's typically when it's due.
Mm-hmm. And just a point on property taxes, you can listen to our property tax episode, but don't forget to apply for the homeowner grant.
Right. So the homeowner grant, just really quickly, is a reduction in the amount that you owe for property taxes. And it can be a few different amounts depending on where in the province you are. The Lower Mainland gets a little bit less for the homeowners grant. Outside of the Lower Mainland and Capital Regional, I think, you'll get a little bit higher homeowner grant. And there's also an age grant. So if you're considered to be a senior, then you also get a little bit more of a grant as well.
Yes, and you only get the grant on your primary residence. So another cost of home ownership that you could also have as a renter is home insurance. So as an owner, you have to get a home insurance package, obviously to insure your home, but you also get contents as part of that. Whereas at a renter, you typically would just get your renter or your contents coverage.
Right.
We did one of our first episodes, I think, was a home insurance, a whole entire podcast episode on home insurance if you wanted to go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
But it is another one of those annual costs that comes with home ownership.
Right. So to give you a bit of a sense of it, because if you've obviously if you've never owned a home, you don't really know. But in terms of insurance, the renter's insurance tends to be a little bit less. So I would say probably less than $100 per month for a year, sometimes even significantly less if it's like a condo or something. And if you're owning a home, and let's say it's a very large home, you're a very wealthy first-time home buyer, you could be paying up to $400 or $500 per month. So the
Mhm.
policy could be up to $5,000 or $6,000 for the year. So depending on where you are, the size of the home, and a
Mhm.
variety of other factors, you could see a fairly minimal expense, or it could be a significant expense.
And then this kind of leads into the strata fees. So another cost here, if you own a condo, a townhouse, even some standalone homes are stratified, where you will have a like a strata fee.
Right. It's a shared expense for shared property.
Yeah, and in that strata fee will be insurance for the building, like a shared insurance policy as well. So the insurance is a big part of it, but
Yeah.
strata fees, another cost
Right.
that a owner would bear and not typically a renter. I think I've
Yeah.
actually seen a couple times where landlords have charged
Wow.
tenants their strata fees, but for the most part, it's an owner cost.
Crazy.
Mhm.
So strata fees, I remember this is going back 20 plus years, but strata fees, they could be fairly minimal. Like I remember seeing some that were less than $100 per month. Yeah.
I
Which
think
is
those days are gone.
things are gone.
Yeah.
So nowadays, typically most stratas are being a lot more fiscally responsible, and they're
Mhm.
actually looking at the variety of things that they'll have to keep, maintain, and potentially upgrade over time. So things like the roof or the siding or insulation or a variety of other bits and pieces of that property that would have to be maintained.
Mm.
So now typically, I think on the cheaper side, we might see strata fees around the $300 per month mark. And depending on where you are, bigger cities can have much more expensive properties with higher maintenance, and those could be up in the kind of high hundreds. So you could see $800 or
Mhm.
$900 per month.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they have coming, and again, insurance rates have gone up, which are a big part of those strata fees that what I've seen recently, anyways.
Right.
Repairs and maintenance,
Right.
right?
That's a good
So
segue. That's actually a good segue
yeah.
from Strata, because Strata typically covers the building repairs and maintenance. But if you own your own home, then repairs and maintenance.
Yeah, you can't call up your landlord at 8 p.m. and complain about the burnt out light bulb.
And light bulbs are not too bad, because
Yeah.
those are pretty easy to replace and pretty cheap. But you also have to think ahead, and kind of like what I was talking about with the stratas, they're looking at the larger expenditures that may go over time. So things like the roof. A lot of people may see this especially at real estate time. They might think, well, how old is the hot water tank? So, like,
Mhm.
a typical hot water tank could be a few $1,000s to replace.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why that home inspection is important when you're looking to purchase. But yeah, roof age, hot water tank, is it tankless? Was it changed more than 12 years ago? Any sort of maintenance that you haven't seen? All those things now become your responsibility. So there's the physical cost, but there's also that sort of organizational ability to get all those things done.
Right. So make sure to plan, and maybe even set aside a little bit of money from each paycheck to
Mhm.
have a safety, security savings account for things that come up in terms of repairs and maintenance. It's a good idea to be prepared.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of a general sense of the
Mhm.
cost that we'd see on home ownership. It may not be exclusive. It probably, we've missed a few things, but those are the major items that will come up. But I always like to think of like home ownership as an alternative to something else. Like,
Yeah.
what are we doing instead of owning a home? And most people, as they kind of grow up, they're living with their parents. So that's one potential alternative. But I'm sure that if you're at the point where you're thinking about owning your own home, you may have outlived the fact that you don't want to live in your parents' home anymore.
This
So,
is true. I have seen more often where people will actually stay living with their parents for longer than maybe they would have 20 years ago, just because, again, the real estate prices have come up and it's taking a little bit longer to save for that down payment. But yeah, so you're in your parents' basement, or you're living with your roommate that comes home at 2 in the morning, or, you know, you want to explore home ownership. This is legit. So yeah, so living with your parents, living with a roommate, renting an apartment, renting a house, renting a suite, couch surfing,
It goes from
living in your VW van.
yeah, and you could live potentially anywhere, but there's obviously costs and benefits to any one of those things. And rent lately, especially,
Mhm.
has actually become quite expensive. We know that through the CPI numbers, through the Bank of Canada, we see that rents have increased 7, 8, 9% year over year. So what used to be a fairly simple rent of a few $100s, maybe now thousands. So it's one of the reasons that people will oftentimes bat around the idea of either renting or owning. So take a look at the various things that are out there, and use your abilities to save to kind of get to that down payment, so that you can then move into home ownership if that's where you want to go.
Yeah, two things to think about. Remember, you've got to have a down payment. You've got to be able to income qualify for a mortgage, right? So those are the two pieces that we're finding are taking buyers a little bit longer right now to get there. But once they do, they've had that goal in mind. They've set their intention. They work towards it, and they're successful. So
That's right.
yeah. And why? What are the benefits? Why should I own a home? Why can't I just rent for the rest of my life? And that's fine. Absolutely. If that's your prerogative, that's a great option. But there are some benefits to owning a home.
That's true. So number one benefit that most people will tend to kind of reference whenever they're talking about home ownership is the fact that you have an asset that appreciates in value. You have the potential for price appreciation. So like you can kind of sit on a house, and if the market goes up, you end up with kind of more money tucked away in that home savings in your pocket.
Yeah. And then you see people start you've heard of the expression, the property ladder, right? So they get their foot in the door at the first home, they build the equity, the principal payments each month, the property's appreciating, and a few years down the road, they can get into the next home. And we see it all the time. It's legit. It happens.
Absolutely. I for sure had that exact same ladder happen in my life. First place was a very small condo, $52,000 purchase price.
$52,000. Could you imagine?
This explains how old I am.
Times that by 10.
That's right. So, and then from there, it was a small house and then a duplex. So, like, there definitely is a property ladder, and you go through it because, especially here in the Okanagan, we were very fortunate to see property values increase. So that kind of led to where that came from. But in addition to the benefit of that property ladder, what's another thing?
Well, another thing that comes to mind is stability. There's so much media attention around sort of the housing crisis and rents and landlords and changes to the Landlord and Tenant Act, and can a landlord take possession of a home? How many months they need to give? So what happens? And we see this all the time.
Absolutely.
So many of our first-time homebuyer files are clients who call us up and say, I need to be out by September 1st. What do I do? Right? So when you own a home, assuming you're making your mortgage payments, it's yours.
That's exactly it. So if you want to be in that place for years and years, let's say your kids are going to school and you're right next to the school, that's a fantastic way to provide that stability and knowing that you're going to be there for that period of your life. Unfortunately, like Mindy says, with rentals, it's really challenging. There's a lot of movement today, and potentially there's a variety of reasons that you could be evicted. So there you have it. What else? Oh, one of the ones that I really love, and I'm looking at my notes here because I'm a note guy. You can make it your own. So when you own your own home, if you want to change the landscaping, if you want to paint your room a certain color, if you want the trim to be wood versus white, you can do all that. So customization, you can make it yours. Do what you want with it, as long as you can afford it and you can pay for the things. There's a lot of things that you can actually do that also help increase the value. So if you're going to do that, look at kitchens and bathrooms to start, but like you have the ability to make it yours. Whereas a lot of times in rentals, it's not necessarily the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, aside from sometimes landlords let you paint, but not really, because then they have to kind of go in and remediate it if they don't like your pink walls. But yeah, you buy a home, and again, as a first-time home buyer, you might be looking at something that needs to be slightly renovated, a slight fixer-upper, we'll call it. But you can go in and you can retile the bathrooms, you can change the countertops, you can paint the cabinetry or put in new cabinetry because it's yours.
Mhm.
And that leads into the next comment, which is pride of ownership. It's yours. This is something that you've had to work hard to achieve, and it's tangible. People can see it. This is my home. Look at my new, bathroom that I just renovated. Look at my beautiful backyard. Look at my fire pit area. That's all yours. That is something you've worked hard to achieve.
Yeah. And if you're someone who is resourceful, oftentimes you can find really good deals on a variety of things. So, for instance, if you want to renovate your bathroom, you might go to IKEA to find a mirror. You might go to a countertop place to find discount countertops that happen to be your exact style in quartz. And you can kind of do all those little bits and pieces, and you can make that home yours. You can provide that pride of ownership, and you can do it fairly reasonably as long as you're resourceful.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think one of the last things that I wanted to say on this is that when you own your own home, you can also be really selective in where you're living. And in some neighborhoods and perhaps some municipalities, you might find that rentals kind of exist in one place or another and may not exist in necessarily the place that you want to be. When it comes to home ownership, you have quite a bit to choose from in terms of
Mhm.
where you want to live.
Mhm.
Now, that's all good. And sometimes gonna have to talk about some of the drawbacks to home ownership. And this kind of leads into one of those drawbacks, which is that even if you do find a place that you really want to live, it might be very expensive. So that
Mhm.
location thing is both a benefit in that you can find it,
Mhm.
but it could also be a drawback in that it can be very expensive. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind when it comes to the location.
Yes, I found in moving from the Yukon to BC, I learned bring cash. There are the property transfer tax, etc. It's expensive. It is to get in. And this is why it pays to be diligent. It pays to have a plan. It pays to save. These things actually do turn into successful home purchases. So, and then not only that, you can plan and be as organized as you want. But what if you're in your new home and all of a sudden, yeah, the hot water tank goes? Or, there's a fire or something. Unexpected costs can arise. And as we mentioned earlier, there's no landlord to call. It's you,
Yeah,
right? So,
exactly. So that cost is borne by you. So being prepared for an eventual repair or bit of maintenance or an insurance claim is really
mhm.
important.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, we were talking a little bit about location, and sometimes, again, in terms of location, you may not necessarily find the home that you're looking for in a particular location, or that location may be too expensive. So, just to reiterate that it's not always easy to find that specific location or municipality if you want to live in a particular area. Let's say Vancouver, you might find that Burnaby might be more affordable, or you might have to kind of move out into the valley where things are more affordable.
And the same could be said in a market that we just came out of a couple of years ago. It was a really hot market. In those cases, there's just not enough listings, right? So even though you want to live in a neighborhood and you can afford to live in a neighborhood, there's nothing for sale. So we saw that. I saw that when I moved to Victoria. When I was house shopping, I think there was 8 houses for sale in the neighborhood I wanted. I was
Yeah.
like, this is not fair. So yeah, there's a few factors at play there.
Totally. And we've talked a little bit about how a lot of times we've seen the property values here in BC, especially, increase over time. Well, one of
Mhm.
the other potential drawbacks to owning a home is that property values can also go down.
Mhm.
And so you could see your investment and your equity potentially decrease over time. It's something to be aware of. It doesn't happen too often. And oftentimes, if we look long term and we kind of smooth out the bumps in the market, we see that there is appreciation over time. But if you're looking in different markets across Canada, potentially, I know Alberta sees a little bit more fluctuations. The prairie provinces do as well. You may actually see that the amount that you bought a house for one year may actually be more than what you could sell it for today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. Something to think about with stratas. I'm thinking here, I was even thinking about the province when they changed certain rules, but
Right.
specifically with stratas. So again, this is a scenario if you're living in a condominium or a townhouse. The strata is run by a volunteer council. And I mean, obviously they have to stay within legal parameters, but they can make changes. Like they can come in and say, no more umbrellas on the patios, or, now there's no noise after 9 p.m., or, whatever it may be. So that's one of those pieces that you have to be cognizant of is it's almost like, yeah, you're free and you're a homeowner, but you are still bound by these rules in this strata.
Right. So yeah, that's another potential drawback. If you're buying in a strata complex, you may find that what you originally bought may not necessarily meet your needs today, or if those rules do change, that it might not necessarily be what you originally thought. So just be aware of that, or get yourself a spot on the strata council.
Yeah, you could do that. Gosh. Oh,
Because we all need more to do.
yeah.
But
And yeah, it's like herding cats. Anyways, so lots to think about, right? Lots of pros, lots of cons. I feel like some of these could kind of go either way for renting or owning. Again, how much time, how much equity, where are you at in life? Yeah, long-term plans, goals, these things all factor into these decisions.
right. And when it comes to those variety of programs that are available to first-time homebuyers, they're there. There's going to be the RSP withdrawal program. There's a few others. There's a first home savings account. Listen back to our episode, that episode 17 on first-time homebuyers and the programs that are available. And if you have questions, just come ask us. We're happy to help and walk you through this, but at least this gives you a few different questions to ask and things to consider before you take that step to your first home.
Awesome. This is The Mortgage Life.
We look forward to continuing the conversation.
So come back and listen.